Hello and welcome to Graduate Theory. Today's episode marks the 10th episode of Graduate Theory, and I thought what better way to recognize this milestone than to get to know me a little bit more and get to know me in a bit more detail. The episode today is a flipped episode, so in fact, I will not be the one asking the questions. I've got Joe from the very first episode of the podcast to come and interview me. So it's going to be an interesting episode. You're going to find out a lot more about me and things I like and my opinions on a lot of things. So I hope this is insightful, and I hope that this gives you a bit more context to what I'm like behind the scenes and what I'm trying to get out of this experience and out of this podcast. Even though I'm the one doing a lot of the talking, I still think there are some useful career lessons in this episode. So I hope you enjoy. I know Christmas is coming soon too, so I'm wishing everyone a very Merry Christmas. And if you want to get episodes like this straight to your inbox, please go to graduatetheory.com and subscribe to the newsletter. When you're there, you get every episode and my thoughts and my takeaways straight to your inbox. I hope you enjoy this episode and finding out more about me. Hello and welcome to Graduate Theory. Today's episode is a special episode. It's episode number 10. So I thought what better way to commemorate or recognize 10 episodes of the podcast to flip the tables a little bit. And instead of me interviewing people and finding out more about them, I thought it would be nice to turn the tables and for the audience, for the listener, for you guys to get some insight about me and perhaps what the context is behind me starting this podcast. What are the reasons why I did that? Where do I actually come from? What do I do? What are my thoughts on life and all that kind of stuff? So to help me with this today, I've got on the line here Joe Weeby, who some people might remember from the very first episode of the podcast. Joe, welcome to the show today.
Good to be back. Thank you very much. Special privilege.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's great to have you on. But yeah, like I said, so today it's going to be a flipped classroom or flipped podcast. So Joe's going to be the one asking me questions today. So thanks so much for coming in on today, Joe. I'm excited to dive in with you and see where we go today.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, it's a good opportunity for me. My podcast is all solo, so I get to try interviewing for a change. So we'll see how we go. You're very brave at giving me this platform. Very, very brave. And I've listened to, very sure I've listened to every episode that's out so far. So I feel qualified in that sense. And I think you've had it's been an amazing start. I think the Graduate Theory, like the podcast, is such a great thing and such a great caliber of guests already. So I think it is exciting for everyone listening to learn a little bit more about you. I reckon we just jump straight in.
Yeah.
I think the obvious place to start is, what was the inspiration for it? Like, where did that start?
Sure.
Where'd the first spark? if you're timelining it, where's the first little speck of this on the radar?
Yeah. Well, the first time I thought about doing something like this was 2020, and I think it was around April. So it was during kind of the first big lockdowns. I think they were all across Australia at that time. So we were locked inside, and I was thinking, I was sitting there, I was in my final year of university. So yeah, I finished at the end of 2020. And so I'm sitting there and I'm thinking about life after university. What is that going to involve? And I really was sitting there thinking, I don't really know anything about the workforce, how to go and grow my career. How does that even work? I knew nothing. And I thought there's people that I could speak to find out about this. And that there's certain connections that I had at the time that I was like, okay, well, I could speak to this person. I know they've had a successful career. Like perhaps I could sit down with them and ask them some questions about it. And so I had a lot of these ideas flowing around in my head. And then it wasn't until, so I guess to go forwards a little bit, since that time, I put the podcast on pause. I honestly didn't have really the guts to do it. I thought it wasn't going to work. I thought it was going to be a failure, really just lacking I guess I had a lot of self-doubt around this kind of thing. And if it was going to be worth my time, perhaps people wouldn't listen, all that kind of stuff. So then if we fast forward, what's that, probably a year and a half almost, since in between that period, I'd got a job in Melbourne. I got a grad job in Melbourne and I moved. I was living in Adelaide and I moved to Melbourne. And through that period, it came up again because we had the lockdowns again in August. Maybe lockdowns are just a recipe for deep thinking. I don't know. Maybe a
Yeah, and
recipe for
podcast
innovation. Yeah.
projects.
But yeah, so we're in one again. And I'm thinking, well, this is something that I'm still thinking about. And it had been on my mind a few times through the year. And it sort of came to me, okay, well, if I, this is something that I keep thinking about and something that I feel drawn to, but am I really going to go through with this or am I not? And I think it was like in 5 or 10 years, I'm going to wish that I at least tried this and saw how it went. And I think I'm really glad that I have done it. And I'm really glad for the lessons that I've taken from people that I've spoken to already. Having these conversations, it's been a win-win because it means I get to speak to these people about things that I want to know about growing your career and these fascinating people. But then it's also good for people listening because they can get in on those conversations as well, which I think at the time, and I think especially now, there's growing that transparency with successful people, especially in Australia, because a lot of the things that I was reading and watching, a lot of the podcasts you might listen to are people that are like in America and their stories aren't as relatable. So I thought that was a good reason to do this as well, is that I found that there wasn't that place to go where I could find people that had gone to the same uni as me or like done the same graduate experience as me or things like that. They were just in this completely different environment. So I thought that was another thing that I was like, okay, I don't think this really exists, or at least I'd been exposed to it. So that was another reason why I was like, okay, I could be the one to do this and really drive this. So I guess that's my reasoning for starting it, and I think it's been a great success so far.
Yep, very good. It's fascinating. It's the same things that really hold most people back from anything. I think it'd be very relatable to anyone listening to that if they're not thinking about starting a podcast, maybe the exact situation of maybe whether it's the next promotion or going for a grad job or navigating the later stages of university, and how many fear evoking situations there are, or I'm not good enough kind of that, which is just a natural part of progression. Like when you're progressing on something, when you're taking a step up, because it's a growth and you're not
Mm.
used to it, there is always an adjustment. So there's always normally doubt. I think it's very powerful, even just listening to your journey around the podcast of that. Is there a change you've seen? I mean, it might be interesting for anyone listening to know, yeah, a bit more about James outside of graduate theory. Like you're working in a typical graduate role too, which I'm very aware of. And so, how is the 10 episode or the 9 episodes so far? Has it impacted the way you're thinking about things, your confidence? Are there any like noticeable changes? Maybe not materially because it
Mm.
hasn't been that long. Like you've jumped industries or whatever, but have you noticed anything in the way you're thinking about work, career, and any of these kind of typical things we all navigate?
Yeah.
Has it changed at all with the advice and lessons from the guests so far?
Yeah, I think one of the main things that I've learned, and even it comes back to what you were saying about this kind of idea of self-doubt and stuff. It's been something that's been a common thread through a lot of the guests that I've had on, is something that they've mentioned they were doing something and they weren't sure if they should do it, or they were having those things where they were doubting themselves or imposter syndrome or all those kinds of words for really the same thing where you don't think that you can do something. And it's been surprising that I know I've had those experiences, and really it's been one of the things I've asked them is like, okay, I've had these things, like, do you have those? And like, if so, how did you deal with that? And it's been common across a lot of the guests where they've all said, I had that experience in this situation or whatever it was. And I think that's been insightful because it shows me at least that having those things where perhaps an opportunity comes up and you don't feel confident to do it, or you're thinking of doing something but you don't feel confident to do it. Like all those things are very normal, and it's really and Andrew, who's the guest I most recently interviewed, he was talking about how that gets easier over time as you recognize that you're in that mode of doubting yourself and then pushing through that. And I think that's something that, having now started the podcast and almost done that to some degree with starting it, and then combine that with hearing all the people on the guests, all my guests talk about that as well. I think that's been something that really I've taken away, is that self doubt is something that's natural and something that you can push past. And having those kind of moments where you have pushed past it successfully, those can build up and really give you some momentum and allow you to continue to push yourself.
So well said. Andrew's point there is incredible. I feel the same thing. I guess he and I are probably the same age.
Mm.
So I think at that stage, you have gone through a couple of different, I always say like 3 times. Once you go through any big challenge or anything you want to try that's new, and you've got 3 different examples, you've gone through it enough times, look back, oh, I always doubt myself. And always, you've established the pattern. But it's hard. And I think even people your age or slightly younger, like typical listener, it's easy to hear that, I guess, in theory.
Mm.
But until you've actually gone through and done it, you haven't really crossed that hurdle yet, and it's very natural. And I think you must get so much value out of even the ritual of regularly talking to people who are just outside of your situation, even though they are more advanced, they've maybe quote unquote achieved more. I'm sure that you must just really thrive off getting that, the chance to, yeah, take a beat, get out of your day to day, talk to them, and then get a reminder from their experience. I'm sure it's very powerful for your life. And I'll save you the hard question, because I know episode 1 was your favorite with Joe Weeby, the incredible author and thinker. But apart from episode 1, right,
Mm.
what has been your favorite interview so far? What stood out?
Yeah. Well, yeah, obviously episode 1. Clear winner there. No, I think each of the episodes, has some kind of unique value to it, and that's been cool
Definitely.
that there's been some element of crossover between all the episodes, but still each one has had some kind of differentiating factor that's been able to provide a unique perspective on a particular problem or something that you might experience in the workplace. So I
Mhm.
think from that perspective, all the episodes have some great value, I think. But I think for me, the ones that stick out is the one with Darren, and in that episode, we were
So good.
talking about some of the I don't know if this is the right term, but it's almost like deeper psychology stuff. So it's not just like kind of surface level like productivity, like hacks, things like that. Like we're really
Yeah, it was
diving into. Yeah, it's
very
like
underlying,
mm,
almost spiritual
yeah,
too.
and I think things like
Which is,
that
I
are
know, is a bit of a woo-ha word,
yeah,
but I think
yeah.
if people listen to that episode, they'll know it's a very grounded, not fluffy kind of conversation. Yeah,
Yeah, you're spot on. And I think even though it does get, like you said, spiritual in some sense or really quite fundamental, I think some of that stuff, and the more I've read about that kind of thing, the more I'm feeling like this is really the kind of thing to focus on to create lasting change in yourself. So I think, and I think that episode was a great example, and we did get quite deep into that stuff. So I think from that perspective, I think that one, and definitely that whole genre of I don't yeah, like you said, spirituality kind of stuff, I think is
yeah,
really
whatever it
beneficial.
is. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's powerful. Oh, you're preaching the converted
Mm,
to me on that stuff. I absolutely agree, and I think that you do have. It is important to canvas all those levels. So I think maybe sometimes the distinction, if this language is helpful, is like tactics are like specific day to day in the trenches, like the tactics. So tactics normally serve a strategy.
mm,
Like strategy is the overarching kind of game plan. And then I think some of those deeper things are more not that they're strategic, but they're sitting high level. Like they almost dictate what your goals are,
mm,
those things. And they dictate the energy you approach things with. That's why they're so powerful. And then things cascade down from there. Because once you've established, I want to, whatever, get a grad job at X company goal, then you're like, strategy. How am I going to get there? So I need contacts and stuff, and then you might start thinking about tactic. And I think it does cascade down that way. So at
mm.
each stage, the information is helpful. And again, comes back to like the value, probably the podcast approach that you're taking, because you've got different people who probably specialize in different parts. Like Darren, that Darren conversation, I remember listening to that. I was like, wow, this guy's just wiped the floor with me. I need to become a better guest. But then you've got, I loved Oscar when you're talking about listening. I haven't really heard too many people talk about listening. Listening is one of the most under-respected skills. Like everyone knows it's important, but no one really appreciates like how important it is.
Mm,
And the way he talked about it in such depth and a really good like niche. So I think that variety is really, really important, which is why probably everyone's got to show up every week, I guess, because you don't know which thing you don't know about yet.
mm.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. So maybe we'll slide into some of those other smaller, well, not smaller, but like the lower level stuff and unpack a little bit. So do you have yourself any kind of key, maybe productivity tips, things that help you on the more day-to-day micro side of things that are top of mind that you want to share with the listeners?
Yeah, I think this has been something that I've done in the last couple of weeks to a month is something that I've almost rediscovered. And it's this guy, his name's Nir Eyal, I think that's how you say his name. And he wrote this book called
Yeah.
Indistractable. And I was listening to
Oh, yeah.
him on a podcast, actually. And he was talking about, I don't know why, for some reason, when I listened to this particular time, because I've read his book in the past, but anyway, this particular podcast, for some reason, it just clicked with me a lot more. And his kind of whole idea of productivity is to really calendarize a lot of your life. So he does it to quite an extreme length where he calendarizes literally everything. So where like every single minute of his day is in the calendar, he'll have time to like, it's like an hour to like be with the kids, like an hour to do this or whatever. And I think that is quite rigid. So I don't do it to that degree. But I think that whole idea of not having a to-do list and not just working through things ad hoc. It's more like, okay, I'm going to spend an hour on this, and however much I get done, that's what it's going to be. And I think that idea of time blocking is something that also Cal Newport talks about. And I was actually researching this a few weeks ago. He has it's like this notebook thing. It's like a day planning journal type thing where you can do this time blocking in like a hard copy. And because he talks about this exact thing as well, where instead of having a to-do list, or maybe you start with the to-do list, but then your actual implementation of the to-do list is in your time. So let's say you might spend 25 minutes doing this, 25 minutes doing that, whatever. And I found that recently it's been something that has enabled me to get more done. Because oftentimes when you have that to-do list, you're kind of like, well, yeah, like I'll do this one. Usually by the end of the day, like maybe half, or like there's always stuff left. Like you never finish the to-do list. At least it's been my experience. So
No.
whereas like you always go through the time.
Guilty.
Yeah. So like having that, time, and even say, okay, this is like 50-minute block. I'm going to do this thing, and really consciously deciding that you're going to do that, I think has been, and then by deciding that, it's also, I'm not going to do this other stuff. So at
Mm.
work, even I'll say, okay, I'm going to spend an hour doing this. But that means during that hour, I'm also not checking my emails on my phone, that kind of stuff. So that gets like closed, phone goes away because I'm not doing that stuff because I've decided to focus on this one particular thing. And I think that process of even just like planning my day, deciding what to work on, bringing a lot more clarity to what I'm supposed to be doing at certain times, I think that's allowed me to get more done. And even at work, it's allowed me to participate in a lot more things because I can do certain work faster, which means I've got more time to do other extra things. So that for me has been a bit of a game changer, I think, in the last month. And for anyone listening, I'd recommend looking into that kind of stuff because I think it's very beneficial.
Yeah, I've similarly started adopting a bit an approach that befits that sort of style myself. I think there's something to do with the lack of control we have is hard to overcome with planning. That's why I think that the time blocking approach, you're allocating certain time to things, which you can control. You can control how much time you spend on things, but you can't control how long they take to get done because that's fluctuating and dynamic. I don't know, the whole concept of, as you were talking, and all great points, the whole concept of productivity almost just makes me think that we have to acknowledge that there's just like some toddler part of us that it's so hard to actually get it to do what we want it
Mm,
to do. And we have to really get
mm,
creative and be very intentional and structured about how we get our inner toddler to basically like just do its work and
mm,
whatever. It's a very, and also like a lot of your takeaways from Lydia's episode number 7, I believe, about like how we're the athlete metaphor
mm.
too, or the athlete comparison. I think that's really good addition to that advice because you got to put in the time for rest, recovery, recuperation. We don't really have that in the business or corporate world, I think,
Mm.
too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think just to
Yeah,
add to
so,
that as well is
yep.
like even coming back to that stuff we talked about with Darren and like the spirituality stuff, you almost wanted to get it to where you don't really need these techniques where it's just work becomes something you actually want to do rather than like you're trying to set yourself time because like that's the only way you're going to be able to do it to where you actually find it
Mm,
fun to do the things.
mm.
And I think that's a game changer as well, is how can you make what you're doing interesting and fun so that you don't actually need to allocate 2 hours a week on the thing that you don't want to do because like those don't exist. It's just, I mean, maybe they always will, but I think having it more of that rather than less and actually enjoying things you're doing is also important in just being productive as a natural state rather than being it's something that you're trying to force yourself into.
Pretty appealing if it makes it enjoyable now. I think that's pretty low risk for people. So definitely a mindset worth embracing. I know I certainly try my best. Okay, so Indistractable sounds like a good book and I might have to check it out, which is a nice segue because you, like me, are a very avid reader. I know you've done stuff even about your reading before online and everything. I have to ask, I don't know if I know this. Best book you've read?
Hmm. It's a tough question because yeah, I've had periods where I've been sitting down reading heaps of books. So I've gone through quite a few. So but yeah, like you mentioned, sort of in between, we spoke earlier about the original idea for the podcast, and then a year and a half later, actually starting it. So that was probably in September this year. But in between that period, I had an Instagram. It's still there. It's called James Notes, and I was just kind of writing and making stuff in there about different books that I'd read, which was a good experience. But I'm not really active in that anymore. But I think that was maybe one of the catalysts as well for starting the podcast. But anyway, back to your question. So, favorite book of all time, and I think it's hard to narrow it down to one. And I think it even would, if I'm going to even recommend one to someone, it would depend on the situation and
Person.
things like that.
Yeah.
But I think one that I really enjoyed was High Performance Habits by Brendan Bouchard, I think his name
Bouchard?
is. Yeah.
I've heard of Brendan Bouchard, but I haven't
Yeah.
read the book.
His book,
I haven't
yeah,
heard of
High
the book
Performance
before.
Habits, I think that was really great to read. And it's all about, at least one of the main lessons I got from it was like, and I'm not a messiah. I don't like practice it all the time. Like I'm still human, right? So, but
Healthy
yeah,
disclaimer. Yeah,
but
got
like
it.
one of the things he talks about is like intentionality. So how can you be
Big word.
intentional in everything that you do, or at least let's say you come home from work and you're about to go into like see your family or whatever it is. What are you trying to get out of that experience? Are you trying to who do you want to be like? Maybe it's as a dad or as a partner or whatever. Who are you trying to be in that scenario? If you go into a meeting at work, like who are you trying to be in that meeting? And really reflecting on that idea of like even like what's your aim to get out of this? Who do you want to be like? What do you want to be known as? Things like that, and just reflecting on that quite a lot before you go into different situations. So even if it's like taking, and again, I don't do this really often, but it's something that I'm trying to work in more. It's a good concept, and I think you can even listening to what I'm saying, note that it would be a good idea to start doing. Like I think that's a really cool idea, and it's like yeah, before you do something, what's the actual aim of this? Why am I doing it? What do I want to get out of this experience? Even if it's just something short, like a half an hour meeting. I think coming back to that often is a good exercise, and one that can add that 5-10% onto everything that you do, and really make sure your authentic self is shining through in
I
situations.
find that fascinating because I know you're very across Cal Newport, and I'm sure you've read a lot of books around that concept of high performance habits, all that stuff. So it sounds like that one stands out amongst that literature. And is that the reason, I'm assuming? Because the emphasis on intentionality in just very explicit terms.
Because yeah, I think the intentionality idea comes into almost everything. Like whether it's speaking about productivity just before deciding what you're going to do, that's being intentional. How am I showing up into certain places? How am I showing up to the podcast? How am I showing up at work? Things like that, and really not letting yourself fall into this kind of haze almost, where you're just going through the day and just doing whatever comes, and like just you're not really setting the direction of your life almost. And so it really is quite fundamental, I think. And it leads into a lot of those ideas about like productivity, normal habits, a lot of other concepts I think are really rooted in this idea. And again, it is hard to remember that. But
What a challenge. And it is a bit because sometimes there's also some level of things flow in life too, as well. So it is not all just like I'm on. It's all me pushing all this energy all the time. So it does combine with this natural flow, maybe a bit, if you, for lack of a better term, some of that stuff Darren was talking about. And it's some sort of funny combination, but it is one of my favorite words personally, intentionality. It's a good word to describe things, like the attitude and the posture you take towards things, isn't it? Because it's not specific to whatever your pursuit, your main interest is, your career type, whatever. Because there's nothing, no matter what you're doing, if you're a stay-at-home parent or a CEO of the world incorporated, you can be intentional. In fact, you probably should be intentional about what you're doing, I
Mm.
guess, because time's finite. So if you're not being intentional, like your agenda gets set by external factors rather than factors you've consciously chosen and opted into, which is very, very powerful,
Mm.
very important over the long run. Yeah, it's fascinating. I think so. Another thing, I think we want to make sure we covered this. That look, it's very easy to come on podcasts and talk, share a lot of interesting ideas, but I think you mentioned the word transparency before, and I think it's really valuable to see where others that you're listening to or digesting maybe haven't always been crash hot or haven't always been whatever host of Graduate Theory or whatever they're doing. So talking about like failure, I think would be interesting to go through. And some of the if there's a failure that kind of stands out, but you're still super young, still kind of early in that career journey, the typical career journey. But are there at this point in time any failures that kind of stick out, favorite moments? Maybe they were setbacks at the time, but there's been some sort of silver lining or key learning. Is there anything like that you can unpack?
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's a good question. And I think I haven't had really any failures that have been like life ruiner, like something
Yeah.
that's really crushed me.
Went broke, had to start again.
Yeah, yeah.
Fired, kicked out,
Yeah,
no one
like I
wanted to
haven't had any
hire
horror stories, and my
him.
upbringing really has been quite good. Like I'm very fortunate in many in many aspects at least. So I think for me, I think I've been thinking about this question even before the podcast, but I think I'm gonna actually choose two that I
Cool.
think were,
You're allowed. You are the host.
yeah. So one of them, and maybe these weren't even like we've said, not like a particular moment that was a failure, but it's maybe something that I didn't do as well as I would have liked and caused me to improve on in the future. One thing was I really, through my first 3 years of uni, I really just coasted by, didn't really, that whole idea we just spoke about intentionality and things like that. I wasn't really intentional about what I was doing. I was just doing almost the bare minimum, just coasting along. And then it wasn't, and that was something that in hindsight, I wish I did more. And it wasn't until I went on exchange in the first semester of 2019, I went to Sheffield in the UK for 6 months, and it was. I remember this because I through the whole thing I did like video, like video blogs or whatever, and even just like my own
Right.
video journals. I remember it was the night before I was coming back to Australia, and I had my video out and I was recording myself on my phone, just like walking down the street, and I was just talking about what I wanted to do when I arrived back in Australia. So I'd been away for so long, and it was the first time I'd been away from my family and my friends and everything for that long. Um, and I was reflecting on my experience at university and life generally, and I was thinking, this really hasn't been as good as I wanted it to be, and it's really been something that I know that I can get more out of this, and I know that when I come back to Adelaide, I know that there's more that I can be doing and things that I can do a lot better. And so having that experience and that time away really made me realize that I hadn't been, almost like, being as intentional as I know that I could have been. And so that really for me was a big catalyst going into, like, from that experience into my final 3 years, 3 semesters of uni from that point. Like my grades were significantly better. Like I think I have on my website, I think I wrote a blog post about this, but I have like my university grades are on there. And it's kind of like the grades are like this. And then they're like way up here, like the average grades. So like once I came back from that, I did significantly better in grades and in life and everything. So I think that was a great experience for me. And I think the second one, again, probably wasn't like a failure per se, but it was something that I didn't do as well as I could have, and then resulted in me doing things better. So the example would be, it was in that 2019 semester two. So this is the first semester after I'd come back from Sheffield. I didn't that's when kind of internships and things were coming up because I was in my, is it called your penultimate year? I don't know, second to last year. I
Yeah.
think that's your
Yeah.
penultimate year. So
Okay.
I was in my penultimate year. You're applying for internships that are sort of in the last summer before your final year. And I I didn't get into anything, quote good or anything that I really wanted to get into. And I was very fortunate that there's a company in Adelaide called the RAA, which is like your roadside assistance company. And I was really fortunate that they also had an internship, and I got that one, which is a really, really great experience. But I got it like right at the end. It was after all the kind of major companies had already done theirs. And I had a great experience there, and it was really good. But it got me thinking, this time next year when I'm applying for grad roles, which is probably more important than internships, I need to take this process a lot more seriously. And so what I did was when it came to the grad roles, which was starting in like February the next year, I created my massive spreadsheet. I made sure I put in all, because like every job that I applied for, where I was up to and things like that. So I could be a lot more, clear about what I was doing. One of the problems I had when I was applying for the internships was I was just almost talking crap to myself and really overstating what I'd actually done. Like I might be sitting there thinking, yeah, I've applied for so many jobs and whatever, but in reality, I've only applied for like 5 or something. And I've really just kind of, this idea I have in my head of what I've done is not the same as what I've actually done. So I made sure that when I was doing it for the grad roles, that I actually had it all written down so I could see this is actually how many I've done and this is the way things are going to go. So if you're unhappy with the way this looks, then it's on you to go and make this better. So it was good that I had that experience because it meant I had this spreadsheet and I was able to do that stuff a lot better. And then unfortunately I got a grad role at ANZ, which is where I'm at now. And so far it's been really, really incredible. And that was the reason why I moved to Melbourne, like we spoke about at the start of this year. But I think and that has led to so many things, really, that like everything that's happened with moving and meeting new people, and even you met yourself this year. And there's been so much stuff that's happened this year that's led from those things. So I think that while it wasn't necessarily a failure and it was something that turned out really badly, it was something that gave me perspective on what I was doing and allowed me to improve and then for that to lead to better things the following year.
It's powerful stuff, James. I want to touch both of those points if I may.
Mm.
The first part I can speak to a bit more broadly. I think we've had this conversation that the travel experience, in my little world and language, I use the metaphor of the bucket, where it's a good opportunity, especially for young people, to empty everything they're doing in their life and all the people around them for a window, because it enables you to reflect on it. It's hard to a situation when you're in there. Like you can't see the outside of a car when you're inside it driving, right? It's good to be able to just get out and actually look at it. And when you travel, especially when you go on exchange, and not just travel, but when it's like exchange or immersion somewhere else, like you're ingrained in another way of life. Because a holiday, you stay at whatever, if it's hostels or whatever, hotels, you might not get that. It's very common in a lot of big, I don't know, famous entrepreneurs and their stories, that traveling, especially in the East and stuff, was really a real switch. And it's not something that would be in conventional advice or university hacks or career hacks, to when everyone's trying to, whatever, get the grades or get the best jobs, whatever the goal is. It seems like a counterintuitive idea, but I actually wanted to place emphasis on it because I think you've given a very powerful example of it. And my observation and my own personal experiences a bit more broadly, building on that, it tends to have that impact if it's a true immersion, like exchange experience. It also answered another question I had, which is why you go for the Blades. Now I know you're actually in
Yeah.
Sheffield. That's a soccer reference for those unfamiliar. And then the other part, I think the way you talked about the lack of intentionality, but then having the fire to basically rebound from that and really make good next time. I think it's a very big point. You put great language to it. How often do we convince ourselves we've done a great job on things, but we actually haven't done much? I do that so often still. Like, why am I getting these results? Why am I getting more of this, more of that? I'm great. I'm doing great stuff. And then if it's for work, it's like, oh, I'm actually not promoting things very much. Like, what am I talking about? What am I
Mm.
complaining about? It's actually me. There's so often our mind is just a really easily deceived little tool, isn't it? Like
Mm.
it's so easily deceived into a state of like entitlement, because I think we have a resistance at first to doing the work. But that's a great story of it actually getting you to get into gear to actually prepare and then see the results. And I think if 20 or 21 listening to that, right now, it would fire me up to just get proactive, because why not? Now
Mm.
you've got the call to action. Right now, it's not hard. It's just process and you get the results. Like, you're a good example of that. And I think I think you put that very, very well. I think that's actually very, very powerful lessons, and people can take the lessons, or they can go make the mistakes themselves and then realize you
Yeah.
got an options, don't you?
Yeah. I think a lot of those things, like even that example of where I didn't get the kind of jobs that I was really really wanting. If you're not getting to places that you want to go, if your work isn't getting seen by the people that you want it to be seen by, things aren't going the way that you want, then it's actually on you. It's not like the company isn't making a mistake and not seeing the greatness that you have or anything like that. Like maybe they missed you, or like maybe there was an error or something, like maybe, but it's not helpful to put it on them. It's really up
Yeah.
to you. And if your like work's not getting seen by the right people, if you're not getting into roles that you want, then it's your responsibility. Like no one's going to come and help you to like no one's as passionate about yourself as you are.
I think to consolidate, there's a cop out answer,
Mm.
which is they just don't get my value. And hands up, I've done that lots of times. So no moral high ground here.
Mm.
I think, but on some level, if you go through all these situations and you're failing to take any responsibility, that's not helpful.
Mm.
So you might flip this and talk about leadership, for example. When you see a great coach of any sporting team and the team puts out a terrible performance, you never see a good coach go into the press conference and say, I gave them a great game plan. The boys let me down, or the girls let me down today. They're rubbish. James at right mid, he was terrible. Joe at center mid, he was terrible. You just don't see that.
Mm.
But how many times is that actually the case? But the coach seems to always take responsibility and take it off the players, like as an example of leadership. So you might consolidate that lesson you have into like leadership of yourself. It's like, yes, there are always politics at companies. There's always there's a constraint on hiring processes, maybe, because if it's CVs and applications and it's not like everyone gets interviewed face to face all the time. So there's storytelling involved and there's interpretation. So yes, there are some outliers that there's some factors that you can't control. But at the end of the day, you don't get to control that, do you? And I think that's why acknowledging what you can take responsibility for is really your point. Well, I don't know. I found that the point of your story, because you also can't guarantee someone will hire as well. But what you took control of is like a pretty good bet. Like, you're going to get somewhere when you take that approach. Taking the approach of, I did the work, they just don't appreciate me. Well, cool. You can take that mindset, but where's going to get you, even if it's true?
Yeah.
Even if it's true.
Yeah,
That was my interpretation
Mm.
of your story. I think it's a very important part of like just life. I think it's a great thing to learn at a young age.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think it does, and I think it got across well, which is good. But yeah, I think there's a lot of those situations that can happen where it's easy to blame other people for why you're not getting to a certain place, or why there's bad things happening or whatever. And it's just, I think it's so important to ask that question of what role did I have in this situation, and how can I, how can I make this situation better, and what mistakes did I make in this? Even if you didn't make it, maybe you didn't even make any mistakes, but like really taking as much like responsibility, and like, because everything that's happening in your life is your fault almost, and trying to shoulder that, and then doing things that way, I think is important. Because yeah, the key thing, I guess, is that no one's going to come and like fix your problems for you. Like, you have to do it
No.
yourself. So no one's going to no one's just going to come and ask you, yeah, do you want a job at your dream company? Like, no one's ever going to do that. So it's on you to go and get those opportunities yourself. And I think that's something that I've learned, and I'll continue to learn. But I think it's something that's quite important.
Yeah. Well, a great thing to keep top of mind and take away. Like, very great. So moving on a little bit, do you consciously think about, so you've started this journey, right? You're well underway now, with graduate theory. Do you consciously think about sort of how you want to be described and how you want to be, I guess, seen for like the work you're doing, or I guess the values you're bringing to it? Like, how do you want people to think about and describe you if you get a choice to cultivate that?
I think that's a good question. I think that's a difficult question, but I think often with something like a podcast, it's you could have kind of the brand, but really the brand is almost just a reflection of myself and my values. And often that's the
Certainly.
case with companies. Is the company's values are usually a reflection of whoever's in charge and or the people that are in like that run the company. It's usually their values that kind of filter down.
Correct.
So
Yep.
I think for me, like the way that I want to be known and the way that I hope it reflects in graduate theory is I want to provide inspiration, and I want to be an example for people that they can go out and do things too. And even coming back to the self doubt we were speaking about at the earlier in the episode, things like that. I want to be an example for people that they can overcome these things too, and they can go and achieve things in their life if they want, and they don't have to be held back by expectations or doubts or things like that. And that's something that I hope comes through in the podcast and just things that I do more generally, because I think it's hard to detach the podcast from my life. It's the same thing, really. So I think that is a big one. And that would probably be one of the main ones, I think. Yeah, and I think this whole idea of like personal responsibility, like we spoke about too, is really important. And that's something that I try and do a lot of. And I think people can take that and apply that to their own lives too, where taking personal responsibility for all the things that are going on is something that I try and do and something that I hope comes across.
I'm curious, do you think like the version of you, here's the question. How do you think that version of you before you went on exchange would have responded to this podcast, like just listening to it as like a listener?
Yeah.
Not as like, oh, this is what I'm going to do in the future. I'd like pretend it was Joe runs Graduate Theory
Mm.
podcast and there, but Joe has obviously a huge overlap. Like, do you think this would have, what impact do you think this would have had? Would you have listened to stuff like this
Yeah,
at that time?
it's a good question. I think I would have, but I think I would have just it would have been one of those things like I would have just listened and then that's it. And I would have just like tick, I listened to it.
Over the
Yep,
head.
cool. Like I listened to productivity podcasts today, like cool.
Yeah.
But there wasn't that like connection to here's what I listened and here's the things they said. Now here's what I'm going to change in the things that I do. I think that
Mm.
disconnect was definitely missing, and it's something that I try to do even now. Even last year when I was reading heaps of books, like I read books, almost just for the sake of it, and
Yeah, me
there
too.
wasn't and there wasn't that connection to
Yeah.
okay, I'm reading. Even it comes back to like I'm not just going to read because like reading is good, and like Bill Gates
Yeah.
reads, so like I should read. It comes back to like okay, here's a problem that I have.
Yeah.
Now here's what I'm going to do to fix it, and the tools I'm going to use to fix the problem. I'm going to listen to books, listen to this particular podcast, do these things to fix this problem, and coming at it that way rather than, which I guess is almost that intentionality, right? It's like let's be
That is, mate.
intentional
Yeah. Reading
when I'm
intentionally.
reading, when
Yeah.
I'm listening.
Listening.
What am I actually trying to get out of this, and what am I going to try and use from the things that I'm doing? So I think, yeah, if I was listening to this years ago, I probably would have just there wouldn't have been that connection, and that's something that I hope comes across too, and what we speak about in the episodes is not only speaking about these topics, but also having that application of like, okay, we spoke about self doubt. How do you do that? Because I think there's a lot of things I read
Yeah.
and listen to. There's no connection to that where it's
Don't let self-doubt hold you
yeah,
back.
yeah, it's kind of like
Thanks.
you
Thanks. I
motivating
won't.
me, that's great, but like there's no what do I actually do? And you're not like it's hard to work that out. But I think having that actual action step is something that's important. And not only listening to the action step, but actually doing the action step as well is something that like many people you could even just sit them down and be like, hey, you've got to do this, 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 and then you get this result and they still won't do it. So I think having that there, at least for the people that do want to do the action steps, is
Mm.
important.
Yeah, I think that's a big, I mean, if you want to talk about the self-doubt bit and just riff a little bit, before I've got one more, probably one more question for
Mm,
you after that. But I feel like to avoid it being just, yeah, blanket, I don't know, motivation pump statements, like
mm,
don't let self-doubt hold you back. Don't be afraid. Very talk is cheap, right? My thinking is that you do overcome it. Probably going back to what your reference to Andrew there before around, oh, you've gone through self-doubt on maybe on a career or a career risk level a couple of times or a creative risk level a couple of times. And then you get familiar, you get used to it. But it's through proceeding through it. Like you said, action steps is a good phrase, sorry. Like taking action steps to actually get on the other side of something, having gone through it. That's actually the key to overcoming it
mm,
in my mind. Like you're taking the process. Like your best example is, I'm assuming, stuff to do with graduate theory. And it's probably things like, I would assume, like releasing it for the first time, maybe because thinking, oh, is this weird to do? Like,
mm,
do people want to hear me interviewing people? Those things are very common.
mm,
Maybe reaching out to guests as well, because there's a lot of there's a lot of potential for, I don't know, rejection or embarrassment and things like that. Am I bothering this person? Things like that. So maybe, I don't know, reflecting on that, you can comment. But to me, those are the things, if people are listening wanting to know, how do I overcome that? Like James seems to be certainly overcoming it because you've been there. To me, I would say it's those things, but I don't know if you have any comments or anything else around that.
yeah. Yeah, I think the self-doubt thing and is something that I guess, like you said, there's been instances where I've overcome that, maybe successfully. We'll find out.
Yeah.
But I think, like, to take it back to the action steps there, where it's okay, like, the first thing is to notice that what you're experiencing. So, like, notice that you are having that self-doubt is the first step. So, let's say one thing would be, let's say a new position comes up at work that you think you might like to do, but maybe you could
Yep.
apply to do it, and you're not sure if you should, or even you've applied and
Yep.
you're not sure if you're going to get it. You don't
Yep.
believe in yourself that you can actually do the role. That's the first thing. Notice that you're actually
Notice.
experiencing that,
Yep.
and then the second thing is, even ask why are you experiencing that? Like, where does it come from? Do you just not believe in yourself generally, or like, does it come from, maybe there's like linking back to like some kind of a childhood experience? Is something that we could talk about as well, but we don't have time. But is it
A
an
high school
interesting topic? Yeah,
experience.
or whether, yeah, like a high school experience or whatever it is. Why are you thinking that? Perhaps you can think of reasons why too, and then just trying to rebuild your confidence a little bit and say, okay, doing
Yep.
this is going to be good for these reasons. And even thinking about, yeah, I think for myself, I guess if I take it back to starting the podcast, it was more of like, well, actually, no, Andrew was saying this. He was saying, chances are if you've applied and you've gone that far, you're capable to do the thing. So like you wouldn't have even like thought about doing it if you weren't able to. So I think that's big. And I think it's really trying to develop that, like recognize that feeling and just sort of sinking into it. Even that's something that Darren would say. It's like just sit there with it, feel where it is in your body, sit down, like close your eyes, and just experience as much of it as you can, and then just let it like do its thing. Let yourself
It wants
just
to
let
be
it out.
expressed.
Yeah,
That's what he said. It's
because
good
yeah,
3
I
steps.
found in my experience, like there's been times where that's happened, where things have come up and I've put myself forward, and then even during that process, I've been like, oh, like I can't do this. Like they won't pick me because like I'm not good enough or whatever it is. And I think if I could go back to those scenarios, and even I've found as time's gone on that I actually would have been pretty good at doing these things that I perhaps
Damn. Yeah.
opportunities that I didn't get, or at least seeing the people that are in these positions that perhaps I didn't think I could do, that they're not anything special, and I easily could have done that as well. So I think it's definitely a difficult thing to get through that self doubt, but I think it's still quite vague. I feel like I feel like it's something you got to go through
It is
yourself.
actually, no, it's, well, that's worth giving people comfort over as
Mm,
well. It is vague because it's very individual.
mm,
It's very individual specific. Any high level concept, in my opinion, is really hard to just talk through.
mm,
That's why there's so many people in maybe the spaces of personal development and self-awareness and all this stuff, and from spirituality to practical career stuff to product. There's so much in there, and it's good. You talked about yourself being whatever before you went on exchange, and this might have just gone over your head. But the thing I notice about this kind of journey is that at some level, the podcast, people start by reading books and listening to podcasts first. They start by consuming content before they take action because it's an easier step and they're getting ready. And then it all sinks in. So that the podcast that just glossed over, yes, like that wasn't like the thing you grabbed and implemented, but that prepared you for something you're going to listen to in 3 years after you've done exchange. You'd half listen to these podcasts. The message is trying to get to you and it's sinking in. So on a broader level, yes, there's not something that you might hear in a one podcast episode that's just going to dissolve all the self-doubt. But I would draw it out to zoom out and draw your attention to the fact that it is a process. And James, people have transparency on your story now. They can see the process, how it went for you. And I think that makes it okay because you are at some point on that. And if they're listening to this, we know enough about someone listening to this that they're listening to this. So that means that they are somewhere on that journey. They might just be listening because Graduate Theory, great podcast. Or they might be facing this and they might be part of the early career and natural. Everyone's got self-doubt. It's very natural. There's so much comparison. There's so many measurable, I did or I didn't get it. So yes, it's quite a journey. But I just think if you're listening to this, you are somewhere on that journey, which means we can tell you how long it's going to take. And we can probably say it's probably never going to be completely done, but you probably get used to it and it gets easier. And patience and process are big too, but ongoing journey. The last thing I want to end on, if we could, was obviously have to give you a taste of your own medicine. What is one tip you would give to new graduates? I believe that's your final question.
Yeah,
I might have misquoted it a little
you're
bit,
right,
but
yeah.
what's one tip you would give to new graduates today?
I think the main thing is be intentional about what you're doing. So, and really that's something that, I think is so important. It's like, let's say go like 1 clock forward a year. What would make this year a successful year for you? And what things are you going to do this year that would be good? Like, even if it's coming to networking, like, be intentional about who you're networking with and make that something that you do. Get involved, participate. Really, like, life's an adventure. So you've got to go out and make stuff yourself. Like, no one's, it's coming back to even what we were talking about before. Like, no one's going to come and, like, make your experience great for you. Like, no one's going to sit there and be like, okay, you know what? This is the perfect opportunity for you. Here you go. Now, like, here's, like, the perfect thing. Like, you have to go and create that stuff yourself. So you've got to go and meet the people you want to meet with. They're not going to come to you. You've got to go and seek opportunities that you want to do because no one's going to come and bring them to you. You've got to really take life with both hands and go out and embrace the world and go out and seek things yourself. I think that is the one lesson that, that I try to apply, and that I think that would be my lesson to a new graduate as well. Is like, the life's an adventure. It's a journey. It's fantastic, but you've got to get in there and to make the most out of it. Get in the arena and go out and enjoy and really take life with both hands. I think that is fundamental and something that will not only be useful through your graduate experience, but it's something that's a fundamental principle, I think, through your entire life, is to go out and just tackle stuff head on and get involved. Don't just sit on the sidelines and mock people or just watch people that are doing cool stuff. Like, get in there and do cool stuff yourself. Get in there and meet people and participate and do stuff. I think that's something that I've grown into doing this year, and I think it's something that I would recommend to everyone. Yeah.
That's it. James Fricker says, ladies and gentlemen, get off your ass. Stop sitting on your hands and seize it. What else do you need to hear? Oh, well, powerfully put. What a way to end. Thank you very much, James. I hope I met spec and did the show justice. A big reminder for everyone, best episode is episode 1, of course. And go back to the start if you're new. But yeah, remind them, of course, as is customary, where can they find you? Where can they be grabbing more?
Yeah, in the show notes of this episode, it will be the best place. It's going to have all the links. So you've got Graduate Theory, graduatetheory.com, the website that'll have everything. You can go and read more about the episode there as well. Otherwise, we've got the Instagram, the LinkedIn, the YouTube as well. So in many places. But all the links will be in the show notes. Graduatetheory.com is the main place to find all that stuff. Yeah, thanks so much, Joe, for coming on today as well. I think we've had a good chat and we've gone deep, and I think hopefully that's useful for our listeners to find out more about myself and about the podcast and things like that. So I appreciate you, coming on and speaking to me, because I think we covered some interesting and useful concepts today, and hopefully almost as useful as having a guest on. So yeah.
Certainly. Certainly. Thanks for the privilege. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Graduate Theory. I hope you enjoyed listening to me talk for a little bit longer than usual today. Hopefully some of those lessons were useful and you can go and apply them in your own life. Because we're not about just saying the concepts and about giving you that motivation. It's also about what can you do to apply these things. So I hope you enjoyed the episode today. If you want to find out more, if you want to find out my insights and my takeaways from today's episode, go to graduatetheory.com, and on there you can read the post about this episode. And if you want to get those posts straight to your inbox, consider subscribing to the newsletter where you get that straight to your inbox. You can also subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on, whether that be podcast or YouTube. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please consider leaving a review so that we can get more people listening to the great content that is in Graduate Theory. I hope you enjoyed, and I'm wishing every one of you a very Merry Christmas. I hope you're enjoying the Christmas break and whatever you might be doing over this period. Thanks so much for listening again today, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.